We'll go ahead and get our seats. I know you don't have that many neighbors. Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17. So again, we're delighted that you're here with us. It's exciting to have you, as always. We got some first-time attenders. We also have those that have come here before but are with us again today. Glad you're here. If you are from this area and this is your first time, please let us know. We want to give you a discovery pack that kind of tells you about our church here. And there's a couple of incentives in that. If you'll fill out some information, we'd love to share some things with you and bless you with a gift or two. So let us know if you're in the area looking for a church home, if you are here for the first time. Also, just be aware that next month is going to be Missions Month for those of you that are familiar with this. This is old hat for you, but we'll try to focus our messages on the mission work that we do. We actually have guest speakers coming a couple of weeks from today. We will have Kent Markham, and then 3 weeks from today we'll have Mike Napier. They'll be telling us about the work going on in Ecuador and the work going on in Africa. And that very last Sunday of October is our Mission Sunday, so we'll have a goal for raising money. All the money raised on that day will go towards mission work efforts that we are involved in. So this morning, let's turn to Luke chapter 17. If you want to look in your outline in the bulletin, it's a sermon. I wasn't really creative this week about sermon titles. I tried to think of a clever one. I just put in moving trees, because I've never preached a sermon with that title before, so it's my first time. So, moving trees. Luke chapter 17, verse 5. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it will obey you." Suppose one of you has a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, "Come along now and sit down to eat"? Won't he rather say, "Prepare my supper, get yourself ready, and wait on me while I eat and drink, and that you may eat and drink"? Will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, "We are unworthy servants, we have only done our duty." This is an interesting passage. Now, I said last week that we had chosen a passage for that sermon, which was one of the most difficult passages that preachers have claimed they ever preached on. Even following the sermon, I had a couple of people that pointed out some things that they thought maybe it meant a different thing than what I was suggesting it might mean, because there's a lot of things that are up in the air about that particular passage. And if you weren't here last Sunday and you're wondering what passage that was, I'm on YouTube and I'm on our webpage. You can go there and watch last week's sermon if you'd like, blackwellcoc.com, or check out our YouTube channel, Blackwell Church of Christ, and it'll be probably the first sermon that appears. We upload all of our sermons to that. But this week is another one of those passages I'm not going to say is one of the most difficult ones to deal with, but it's just interesting. It seems a little unique to the other messages, or at least the subject matter or the content that's in Jesus' other messages. This is a little unique, a little bit distinctly different. Obviously, there's nothing wrong or different about people wanting faith. But in the context, what you need to know that earlier in this passage, Jesus has been instructing a pretty big lesson on how we need to forgive. Even if somebody does something wrong against you, even up to 7 times, if it's once a day for 7 days, you need to keep forgiving, keep forgiving, keep forgiving. You'll recall in one of the other Gospels when he was talking about forgiveness, it was the Apostle Peter that raised his hand. He said, "Lord, I'll forgive 7 times," as if to brag on himself, that I'll go further than anybody else is willing to go. And Jesus rebuked him by saying, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. What would you think would be the outcome of any one of us in this room if God's limit of salvation and atonement for us was up to 7 sins or 7 times? Let me ask by a show of hands, if that were the case, if you only had 7 times that you could get forgiveness from God, who's still in on their way to heaven? We're all out, aren't we? I'm going to admit I'd be out if it was just 7 times. Because I don't know about you, but I know not only 7 times, but I've messed up 70 times 7. And you probably would say that kind of speaks on my behalf too. We're all in the same boat. We're all sinners. So that's the context of which he's making this statement in which the apostles make their request, Lord, this is verse 5, increase our faith. And it leads me to believe that what they're asking for, help us forgive that many times, because they understand it's not easy to do. And it's not. Look at it from the perspective of the person that's being wronged. When somebody has wronged you, once is one thing, right? 7 times would be another. At least that's the way my mind thinks. You're probably thinking, yep, I gave them a shot, but they repeated it. And then 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 what are you thinking? They're taking for granted the forgiveness I gave them, aren't they? That's what you're thinking. And Jesus is saying, this is what you do. And the apostles are saying, you've got to help us do that because we don't think that way. When you're asking for faith, you're really asking for that thing that you cannot think of naturally on your own. Naturally, when we're talking about faith, when we're talking about believing in something, we are all of the mindset, I won't believe it until I what? See it. Aren't you like that? I won't believe it until I see it. Show me. Show me. Show me the proof. And we already know that the definition of faith, according to Hebrews in chapter 11, verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That the definition of faith says you cannot depend on your eyesight to physically see it or tangibly hold it for you to believe in it. In other words, to believe is a leap of faith, or it's a risk. It's a risk. It is your spiritual eyesight to believe in God. And it's just like the wind. Well, I've used this analogy before, but it works so well in Oklahoma. The wind is something nobody here in this room would deny its existence. Would you? And yet you cannot see the wind, but you believe in it. We don't see the wind. We see the evidence of the wind. We see the leaves moving across the ground, the branches of the trees going up and down, the ripples on the water. We see those effects. You feel the cool breeze, but you don't see it. You don't see the radio wave signals coming through this room, that if you had the radio antenna and you could pick up that certain frequency, you don't see the signal, but you believe it's there. So there again, with God, we believe Him even though we believe in Him, even though we don't see Him. And here is where our requirement to do what the Lord is asking us to do is pretty unbelievable, pretty daunting to do that. Lord, we're going to need more faith to do that. Because what they're admitting is we just can't see ourselves doing this. You got to help us. By the way, everybody in this room probably ought to be able to say this in just about every aspect of the life, that there's nothing that you can do on your own without God, that we all need God. For our very being, we need God. Let's just say that together. I need God. Can you say that with me? I need God. And you do. And so the first point that I think I would draw, and this is in your outline if you're taking points, the first point I want to make is from this verse 5. We, as servants of Christ, we must have faith. And it needs to be a growing measure, by the way. Peter writes it this way in the first chapter of his second letter, 2 Peter chapter 1. If you read through that, he talks about add to your faith. And he talks about several things there, Christian virtues, that we ought to be adding as building blocks to our faith. But he's implying there that you start off with some, but you grow and you add to it. And it builds and it grows. Add to your faith. We must have faith. There was a question or there was a statement that Jesus was making on another occasion, and he said, "You can do this if you have faith. Do you believe?" And the guy answered, "I do believe. Help my unbelief." He was admitting that I believe, but there's so much more that I know I can grow in. Help me with that too. Here's the point I believe. It starts here and stops there, but I want to go where I stop, and I want more of it. I want more of it. I want it to grow. We must have faith, and we must have an attitude like that. That's point number one. And that's the easiest point of the lesson to get. The second and third points of this lesson is pretty clear. It's pretty obvious. It's just bold statements. The second point is this. Everybody with me so far? Point 2. We need to do what we're told. That's hard. To be told. Just do what you're told to do. We feel dominated when we hear that. We feel as though we are in a submission to somebody higher than us. Guess what? We are. Who in this room is above the Master, Jesus Christ? If you've got Jesus in your life, it's only because you've recognized He's Master. What does a master get to do? To tell you what you ought to do. And thank God that Jesus is the kind of master that will tell us to do the things that really are for our own benefit and to His glory. Now be careful how you heard that. It's not to get what we want, but it's to our benefit and to His glory. The Bible says, "My God will supply all your needs." He didn't say, "I'll supply everything you wanted." But I'll supply all your needs. By God's grace, you have what you need. You may not always get what you want. We need to do what we're told. And so he talks about here the servant that comes in and the master that comes in who says, "Prepare my supper." He's going to expect the servant to do what he's told, and that the servant won't get to eat until the master has eaten. And after he's done what he's told, verse 9, do you think the master is going to say, "Bravo, bravo, I'm so proud of you"? Is he going to give honor and praise to the servant for doing what he was told? It's a rhetorical question, and the implied answer is no. He's doing what he's paid to do. I mean, maybe you're fortunate enough to have a kind of boss that after you've worked there for a while, he's going to commend you for, "I'm always thankful for what you do for this company." And if you're seeking that all the time, if that's something you get, you consider yourself blessed, because basically we're only doing what we agreed we would be paid to do. He's paying you to do that. He doesn't have to always give you honor, glory, and praise every time you're doing it. That's what He expected in the first place when He agreed to hire you. That's the subject matter. That's the comparison Jesus is giving here. That we need to do what we're told. Jesus said it in another gospel this way, "If you love me, keep my commandments." John 14, verse 15. If you love me, keep my commandments. In Matthew, in chapter 7, when he talked about, you remember this, the wise man built his house on the rock, the foolish man built his house on the sand. You remember that song we sing at VBS? Some of the kids that are still in here, we remember that song when we were kids, right? You remember that whole message, that whole illustration was given off the fact, here is the person that hears and does the words of mine that they hear. Not just the ones that hear, but hears and does it. We need to do what we are what? Told. Number 3. And we give honor to the master. We must give honor to the master. As servants, that's what we do. We honor the master. That means we identify where we are in relationship to him. And in verse 10 it says, at the end here, when you've done this, Jesus says, servants should say, we're only unworthy servants. We've only done our duty. We've done exactly what you've asked us to do or expected us to do. And then that brings us to some 3 points here. In the third point, the sub-points, we need to serve with faith. We must have faith. We need to serve with dedication, doing what we're told. And we need to serve with humility. That's faith, dedication, and humility. I moved through this quite quickly, didn't I? It's because I'm hungry. We've got a meal after this. You remember that? But let's do one more thing. I know you've got your blanks filled out now, or you should have your blanks filled out now, but let me show you one more thing that I think is very important here. Look at again verse 6. He replied, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. Now, in another gospel, this may be reminiscent to something else you remember Jesus saying, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed. And a mustard seed was a small, small seed. He talked about how when it's planted, it grows up into this bigger tree that birds can come and make their home in it. So something so wonderful and be such to accommodate birds and maybe other wildlife and to be bigger, starting off with such a small thing, shows us how little it takes just to start off with Jesus. It just takes a little faith. But he in some other texts will say, if you've got that kind of faith, you could move mountains. Here it's a mulberry tree. Other places he says, you can say to this mountain, be moved from this place to that place. Now, I don't know if you've watched the news lately, if you've watched the news anytime in your lifetime, that you've ever heard a story where a guy said to a mountain, move, and it moved. But you know, the mountain, you know the mulberry tree that's been in your life that God's moved before and he can move again. How many of you have had an obstacle in your way that you prayed about and God removed the obstacle? Just raise your hand. Let's see. How many of you felt deficient in something where you were void of something and God gave it to you and that benefited you for his glory? Raise your hand. For example, the Bible says, any of you lack wisdom, you can ask God who gives it to you. And God gives wisdom. I believe that's James 1 verse 5. God gives us what we need. And God can take care. When we look at Jesus' life in the Gospels, especially his miracles, where he calms a storm, or he heals the hurting, or he touches the untouchables like the lepers. Do we not realize that's an analogy to the storms of life and the hurts of our life and to the deficiencies of our life? That if he can calm the storm literally, can he calm the storm going in your life metaphorically? Or the hurt in your life? Or the deficiency in your life? Can he amply supply what you need for that? I believe he can. I have been involved in a couple of different jobs where landscaping was a part of the job, where we had to uproot some trees and ball up the root and move it from like the nursery or from one location to another. And I want to tell you, moving trees is not easy. Even the smallest of trees can have root systems that can just blow your mind how they go off into the ground in so many different ways. And I'm reminded of that every time I get the tiller out to do the gardening and I'm hitting one of those roots, and how you have to kind of work around it or cut through it. But it's a difficult task to move a tree. I also think maybe in an application sort of way for us this morning, that maybe we're the tree that needs to be moved. We're the mountain. Which is all the more reason why we need to be saying, Lord, increase our faith. Increase our faith. It's just a tactful way of saying I think there's some of us that might be stubborn, like a mountain and a tree. You think that's true? Not asking you to point. Don't point, but you think that's true? That may be the tree that needs to be moved, and maybe that is exactly the application Jesus had for these people who were having trouble with, I don't know if I can forgive that many times. Jesus says a tree could be moved if you've got the faith for it. If there's anybody here this morning that needs to respond in a public way, we were going to sing a song, and that's an opportunity for you to come up to the front. We'd like to hear what you have for us to pray for, or if there's something you need to do, or you need guidance in any way. Please don't hesitate to use this time or any other time, but especially now here, won't you come forward as we stand and sing this song?